Hi, I'm Dr. Jamil Sayed, and on this podcast, we're going to talk about some deep stuff. I'm here to tell you that you're amazing, and often, the only person who can't see that is you. No matter who you are, what you do, or where you're from, there's greatness in you. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Jamil Sayed, and welcome to the Transformation Starts Today podcast, where I interview leaders, champions, and high performers from all walks of life as they share their story, the lessons they've learned along the way, and empowering perspectives to help you create an extraordinary life without regret starting today. Today we have with us Dr. William Bengston. William F. Bengston is an emeritus professor of statistics and research methods at St. Joseph's University in New York, and the past president of the Society for Scientific Exploration, an international group of scientists who study anomalies. Dr. Bengston has been doing research into anomalous healing for over 40 years and has numerous peer-reviewed academic publications. His memoir, The Energy Cure, is published by Sounds True Publishers. He has also lectured widely in the US, Canada, and Europe. Dr. Bengston's research has produced the first successful full cures of transplanted mammary cancer and methylcholanthrene-induced sarcomas in mice by energy healing techniques that he helped to develop. He has also investigated assorted correlates to healing, such as EEG and fMRI entrainment and geomagnetic micropulsation anomalies in healing space. His current work involves the attempt to reverse engineer healing and reproduce healing without the healer, and to develop therapies that can be scaled. Bill, it's such an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and I was mentioning to you shortly before we hit the record button, so I'll share it with our audience. So I've been in the world of energy work for about 4 years, and it's been so transformative for myself and the people I've been, blessed to work with. And I got exposed to your work a few years ago, and I remember doing my continuing medical education credits, and there was a colleague of mine who was in an interview with you. And I got to see that interview because it was referenced in the talk that he gave. And I said, that sounds interesting. And I went on YouTube and I found it and I dove in. I think it was 2 hours or so. And I watched it and it was so fascinating. And I found out you had a book, dove into that book, read it several times, recommended it to more people than I can count. And there's so many aspects of it that I think your book, for the modern, let's say, Western thinking individual, I think it's such an amazing space as an intro because it gets their mind thinking scientifically versus what they may be accustomed to when they think of it more as quote unquote like woo woo. And so the way that you put that book together, I thought was so powerful, so accessible. And I've been looking forward to have you on the show for a while, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I like to treat this stuff like a mystery.
Yeah.
I don't preach anything. I don't know anything. I'm just kind of poking around trying to figure out part of the way the world works. And I don't understand it yet. I don't know anybody who understands it. But it's kind of fun poking around and playing mystery novel.
Yeah. I feel like that's
But it's not a novel, it's real.
yeah. I feel like it's part of what creates potentially some of the efficacy, the idea that we don't take it as seriously, so we give ourselves the opportunity to play and to experiment and to try rather than put on this heaviness that potentially either slows down the process or stops it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so if we could begin for our listeners who haven't yet gotten exposed to your work, they haven't connected with you, could you please share with us your story, why you do what you do, what inspired you to get to this point, and anything that was pivotal for you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, it goes a long, long time ago in a place far, far away. I think that might have been Star Wars instead. Uh, but a zillion years ago, I was lifeguarding at a pool, and I heard there was this psychic at the pool who was just one of the members. And I don't, what do I know about psychic stuff? I'd read some of the popular literature and such, but I had actually never met a psychic. And so I figured I'd go meet this guy, and he told an interesting story that he had just found out he was psychic. He didn't know this before 8 months earlier. And he was going around doing psychic readings, psychometry it's called. And so I started giving him tests of psychometry because I don't believe this stuff. I'm not a believer. I mean, I'll just set that down. I'm not a believer. I'm actually a skeptic. I remain a skeptic after all these years, but I'm a skeptic in the real meaning of what a skeptic is. A skeptic isn't a disbeliever. A skeptic is someone who says, what do you got? Show me, but I don't default to belief.
Yeah.
I don't default to something's true. I don't default to something's false. I've given talks for example, in some skeptic societies, and you walk into a room and they're all sitting there like this, and I say, I'm the only skeptic in the room, and they get all ticked off, and they say, no, we're the such and such skeptic society, and I said, you're not skeptics, you're believers. Do you believe that everything I haven't yet said is wrong? And you don't even know what I'm going to say, and that's not a meaning of a skeptic. So I came to this as a skeptic. I remain a skeptic. I prefer skeptics to believers, because then we can have an open dialogue and we don't need to defend our beliefs.
Yeah.
So I met this guy, and it turns out he was for real. I couldn't beat him. Uh, I started to design more and more detailed studies. I probably broke a bunch of laws doing it. Um, I think the statute of limitations is over, so I can just say that. We got people, for example, who were going into a hospital, to sign a blank index card, put it in an opaque envelope, and put that opaque envelope in another opaque envelope. And then I'd hand the opaque envelope to him. I didn't know what was in it. We had co-opted an admitting nurse at a hospital. And so I just got it was actually 8 envelopes. I handed it to him and said, what's the deal? What's the diagnosis? And I got all excited because by that time he was really hard to beat. And I thought I beat him. He only had 7 right, and I said, you're a loser. You didn't get all 8 out of 8. And it turns out I was wrong. The hospital was wrong. The 8th person was misdiagnosed in the hospital and came back, and he was right all along. He's a very annoying person. Anyway, I found that to be interesting. I didn't know what to do with it, but I found it to be interesting until spontaneously he started to have an interesting effect. If he was doing a reading on something, like holding an opaque envelope or whatever he was doing, or a watch or whatever, he started to pick up the physical symptoms on his own body. He wasn't trying to do this, it just was starting to happen. And then the crazy part that happened was that the people he was doing a reading on or a reading for had relief of those symptoms. And both of us thought this was crazy. So he didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. Nobody believed it. It was simply going on. And I thought after a while, it a little slow on the uptake, but I said, do a treatment on me. I had had a bad back since college. I had given up a swimming scholarship. I was a butterflyer and I couldn't arch my back after 100 meters, which is not good for a butterflyer. So I said, fix my back. And he said, how? I said, damned if I know. And I leaned over on a kitchen table in a house we're hanging out in, leaned on the kitchen table. He said, what do I do now? I said, I don't know. Put your hands on my back. Then what? I said, fix it, you dope. So he put his hands on my back and I started to feel a something. It felt like my back became Novocaine, and then it started to wear off from the outside in, and I haven't had a back pain since. That got my attention. It really got my attention. So I was really faced with, because it happened to me personally, and I was the first person he ever healed. What do I do with this? I could play it safe, walk away, and pretend it didn't happen, or I could try to figure out what in heaven's name just happened to me. And for better or for worse, I went down the second path. Let's find out what in heaven's name just happened to me. And that was the beginning of the journey.
Yeah.
with on and off periods, having a family, having kids, having like a normal life. I've spent decades trying to figure out what happens in healing. So my back got better. I decided to let's see if we can figure this out. And I started to drag him around, putting his hands on people who were in pain, and they were claiming that the pain was diminishing. I won't say gone, but it was diminishing. And I watched a couple hundred healings, and I said, we got to do something with this. What do you do with this? What can be done with this? If you watch a few hundred healings, at first it's exhilarating, but after a while it's frustrating because you don't know what, why, where, when, any of those things that someone interested in serious inquiry might be interested in. You were just looking at people coming in, some benefit occurred, people leaving. Sometimes they didn't come back. Sometimes it took more than one treatment. Sometimes it happened pretty quick. I think I was the fastest ever. Um, but what did it? So you come in, you have X. It's a famous algebraic disease. You have X, and you leave better. Now maybe it's multiple treatments, whatever it may be, but you leave better. What did it? Was it time? Because people get better over time. Was it belief? I didn't think it was belief because I wasn't a believer. I was an experiencer, but not a believer. Was it the food you ate, the food you stopped eating, the grapefruit you had in the morning? I can't, I don't have the head to wrap myself around clinical questions like that. I never know why something happens because there's too many variables and such. And so after watching a couple hundred healings, taking part in a couple hundred healings, I decided I gotta go past this. And I ran into another guy who was watching this somewhat parallel to me, a geologist, pretty well known. And we said, what can we do to test this? The phenomenon is seriously interesting. What can we do to really test it? And so that if healing occurs, there's no viable counter hypothesis. And at the time, he was the head of the geology department at City University of New York. And he said, I got some favors owed me. Let me see what I can find out in the biology department. And I'm pretty good friends with the chairman of the biology department there. And so he met with the biology chair and he said, well, let me poke around in my department, see what we can do. And he said, I got the perfect study. There's a mouse model of cancer that has 100% fatality, never been an extension of life past a month after it's been injected with cancer. There's thousands of journal articles written about this mouse and this cancer. Everybody around the world knows this mouse and this cancer. If you're in oncology, you know this mouse and this cancer, and it has never been a cure. I said, let's do it. Let's find out what we can do. And at the time, I had no idea what to expect. So I was thinking, well, maybe we can extend the life towards a month. Maybe it'll be, it won't be a normal curve distribution. Maybe it'll be a negatively cured or negatively skewed distribution, and maybe the mouse will live, to the end of their lifespan and all that. We had no idea what to expect. So we got a cage of mice. I held the cage of mice for an hour at a time in the lab at Queens College, City University, and we watched as the tumors grew. And I was sure this was failing because I expected, incidentally, I'm almost always wrong. I expected if we got to the mice right after injection and we treated them a couple times enough every day, we didn't know. If we treated them every day, they wouldn't develop cancer. I was thinking, it's something like radiation. You go zzz, and you zap the mice, and the tumors or the cancer cells die, or something along those lines. I was thinking conventional oncology, And so I put my hands around a cage of mice, treated them every day. The tumors started to grow anyway, and I wanted to call off the experiment. It shows you how much I believe. Uh, I got talked into going a couple extra days, and the tumors developed these blackened areas. And I said, let's call it off. Didn't work. We tried it, didn't work. Go a couple more days. Tumors started to ulcerate. And so there was this raw part of a tumor. And I said, would you pay attention? It doesn't work. Couple more days. And then the tumor suddenly imploded and the mice were cured. They weren't remitted, they were cured. And by that I mean it wasn't a suppression of symptoms, it wasn't a temporary reduction in symptoms. There was no cancer in the mouse at all. And it's farther than that. We re-injected the mice without any treatment, and the mice were immune to cancer. Now that's reasonably interesting.
Oh yeah.
So first thing you do is I, as a skeptic, go, this doesn't make any sense. Let's do it again. But let's not do it with just me. Let's do it with some volunteers. So I had a couple of faculty volunteers who thought this thing was insane, and they were right. So I had a couple of faculty volunteers. They got a couple of student volunteers, all non-believers, no experience in any of this hocus pocus. Taught them the little technique that I had developed. They treated the mice the exact same pattern. Tumor grows, blackened area, ulceration, implosion, full lifespan cure. We do it again, we do it again, we do it again, because this can't be. The problem is, it be.
Yeah.
It's just, no matter how skeptical you are, be as skeptical as you like, but there it is. I deny there's gravity. I don't believe in gravity. There is gravity. I don't believe in this healing. There is healing. Uh, I just finished recently my 20th mouse experiment. I'm a little slow. Um, I've done it in, I think, 6 medical schools, equal number of other biology labs, and I just finished at Tokyo University, multiple strains of cancer and details you don't care about. And so I have done, at this point, 20 mouse experiments, multiple medical schools, many cell experiments. I've done many experiments. That's the really short version. Yeah, 100 years truncated into a couple of paragraphs.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. And for our listeners, I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to read Dr. Bengston's book, The Energy Cure. Because even though he mentioned prior to our call, it's a little bit older, it's 15 years old, I believe, it is fascinating, it's extraordinary. And my understanding is there's also beyond mice, there's people who have gotten this obvious benefit as well, whether it was cancer or other medical conditions they were dealing with.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so one thing that you alluded to in the beginning that I was excited to bring up is there that distinction that you make right in the beginning of the book between a skeptic and a believer. I so loved that, and I want to just expand on it and give a personal example of this.
Sure.
So I remember when I read that and I said, "Oh, how brilliant." Most people who call themselves skeptic are actually believers. They just believe it doesn't work. And so it's like when for our listeners, I want you to think about something that you consider yourself skeptical on. And is it that you're skeptical in the sense that you don't know and you're actually open to this being the case if it can be proven to you? Or is it that you're just certain that this is BS and this doesn't work and you call that skepticism? Because there's no open-mindedness there. And I love when you said you were in that room with the Skeptic Society and you said, I'm the only skeptic here. That is great. And so I remember, growing up for myself, I come from a really big family, and the majority of them are medical doctors. And so there was a believer perspective. There's a certain way the world works. There's certain things from a medical and healing perspective that are real and certain things that are not. And that was just how I grew up. And so I remember prior to going into naturopathic medicine, I didn't know it existed. So my paradigm was I was interested in holistic medicine and I was going to go down the conventional road and just get my degree and continue studying on my own the way I had been for years prior. And that was the plan. Fast forward years later after medical school, I get a job at this holistic oncology center. And the gentleman who hired me, he had an aggressive cancer years prior, and using a combination of naturopathic medicine, Reiki, and working with a shaman to do this kind of emotional release work regarding some things that happened with his father when he was a child. Those things cured him of the cancer. He then became a Reiki master and he started doing that kind of stuff. And the work I was doing at the time was very similar to what that shaman was doing with him. So he said, "Oh my God, you do that. I would love for you to offer this to our patients. You know, you're hired." He shakes my hand, he felt something, and he said, "You'd be really good at Reiki." And, from a believer, non-believer, like perspective, I didn't know how to take that. So the mindset was, thanks.
Yeah, what do you say?
I don't know what to say to that. And so maybe 8, 9 months later, I moved back I went to school, medical school in Arizona. I'm from New York. And so I moved back to New York. And this was during the pandemic. It was like 2021-ish, 2020. I had this like intuition just kicked in and it just said to me very clearly, it's time to do energy work. And I didn't really know what to do with that. And it just kind of hit me. I was like, okay. So I emailed the guy and he's in Canada. And he basically tells me, well, um, this is something you're going to want to do in person. I don't really do it as much anymore. I'm going to connect you with somebody far more like adept than I am in Arizona. I flew to Arizona and I get trained in Reiki. And at the time, the way I call it is I had the energetic sensory acuity of a brick. And so I couldn't feel anything. So she does the attunement process to, let's say activate the energy. And she goes, "Do you feel anything?" And I said, "No." And so I come back to New York, and the timing was really unfortunate because my mom's brother had passed away 2, 3 days after I got back. And he was born as a healthy baby boy, but what ended up happening was the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. The midwife in Puerto Rico, where he was born, kept trying to deliver him. He ended up developing, he was blue, he developed cerebral palsy and a few other things. And so he was handicapped for the rest of his life. And the doctor said he wouldn't live past, I believe, 10 or 20. And he died at 63 or so. And it was a miracle story. But with a long story short, my grandmother was taking care of him for his whole life. When he passed away, she was alone. And so she stayed with us for about a month or two. And I remember she had back pain her whole life. And she also had all this grieving she was going through. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, I mean, I don't feel anything, but my understanding is Reiki can be used for pain and it can also be used for emotional support. So I asked her, would you be open to this? And she goes, sure. And I didn't have the setup I have now. So there was no like, energy table, massage table, whatever. There was just a couch. So she laid on the couch and I didn't feel anything. So I'm just going to put my hands in the areas that I'm told you're supposed to put them in and let's see what happens. And we finished the process and she looks at me and she just goes, your hands were so warm. Like it felt like there was like a sauna coming out of your hands. And then her back pain went away. And we did it a couple more days in a row. And her emotional grieving process just seemed so much easier. She seemed so much lighter. And like you said earlier, like, what do you do with that? So I sat there thinking, well, that's interesting. Like it happened, but is
That's
it
right.
really because of what just happened with me? So then there's a few more people that I had worked with. And the thing that really shifted me from like when you said earlier, I don't believe in gravity, I know gravity. Prior to this, I had a little bit of belief in healing, but then the thing that shifted me to knowing healing, there was a gentleman in California who reached out to me. I only met him once, and he said, "Could you help my brother?" They were both in their 60s. And I said, "Well, I'm across the country. I'll see what I can do." And we have a conversation, and this gentleman had a really aggressive pancreatic cancer years prior, did the Whipple surgery on his pancreas. He was thankfully okay, and now he's, years later, he's doing well. He's having all these symptoms, and I was hoping it wasn't a reoccurrence of his cancer, and it wasn't. He was having back pain, he was having neck pain, he was having knee pain, not a neck, but back and knee, and a few other things. And I said, all right, well, you've worked with every medical professional I can think of. I just got trained in this energy modality. It might sound weird and crazy and strange, but if you're open to it, I'll share it with you. I said, worst case scenario, nothing happens. Best case scenario, there's a miracle. Are you open to that? And he says, I'll try anything. And I said, this is going to sound weird. And he goes, bring it. And I just said, I can do, I'm like, I've been told I can do this, virtually. Like the distance doesn't matter. But I hadn't done it up until that point. And he goes, what do I have to lose? Let's do it. So we have a session over Zoom. And he's in California. I'm in New York. He's laying in his bed and I have my camera off. And when I'm doing energy work at a distance in my mind, I'm in the room with them. And so there I am working on him, and I start feeling something on his back, and I start pulling on it. And in the video, he starts arching his back, and he goes, "I'm feeling something on my back right now." And in my mind, it's like, what is going on? Like, this is amazing. So the next day, he tells me that he just got his results back from a neurologist because he was having all these neurological symptoms. And the neurologist told him he had multiple brain aneurysms and strokes that were so significant and severe that they couldn't do anything about it. They gave him 6 weeks as a prognosis before they said they believe he'd have a massive stroke. And they told him to get his affairs in order because he probably wouldn't survive. So he tells me that very like in a defeated kind of tone. And I did whatever I knew how to do. And I basically told him, I'm going to be directing energy for you every day going forward. And let's see what happens. And it wasn't over Zoom. It was just on my own for like 10, 15 minutes a day. And 9 days later, I'm out on a walk. And I called it my conversation with God, but conversation with universe, source, whatever. And I just basically said, I really want to believe this energy work stuff is real, but I am skeptical because what if they're trying other things? What if they're doing this? How do I know it's what I'm doing? And I said, you got to give me something that is so significant that I can't deny it. And the next day, I get a video text message from this gentleman. He's laughing, crying at the same time. He's in the hospital. They just did a brain scan. Brain's completely normal, no sign of anything. The doctor said that doesn't happen. Like this is a miracle. And after that, the skepticism started to lift, and then, or rather, the non-believer, let's say, started to lift, and then my ability to feel energy turned on, and then that aided it as well because now I can actually feel it. I'm sensing something. Then the ability to see it started to turn on. And then the work just took off from there. And so getting to hear your story, getting to read your book, there's a part in the book where that gentleman you mentioned, the lifeguard, it was Ben, correct?
Ben Mayrick.
Yeah. And I remember there's a part early on where you say to Ben something like, is there anything else you can do? And Ben goes, I can get rid of clouds. And it was something in the book where you're like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
After I read that, like I tried it and I got rid of clouds. And I
Yeah,
remember
isn't it nutty? It's really nutty.
and then I kept doing it, thinking, hold on, what about that one? I had other people picking clouds, and I
Yeah,
started.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
And it was
the
just,
craziest question statement I've ever heard is pick a cloud.
yeah, yeah. And so, with that being said, your distinction, believer, non-believer, and skeptic, was very useful both to me, but everyone I've spoken to about these type of things. Because if I'm actually a skeptic, then I'm just allowed to be open-minded, and if it's real, it's real.
Yeah,
And
exactly. A skeptic is someone less arrogant about what they know.
yeah. One thing that came up to me that I would love to get your perspective on. So in the book, you talk about how you wanted to get this tested. And so you brought Ben to these parapsychology laboratories. And here are these people that are supposedly the
This is
people.
their day job.
This is their day job. They quote unquote believe in it. They know it's real and all these things. And I thought it was fascinating how that experience unfolded. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, before we got to the healing work, he was doing this psychometry, and I gave you one quick example of testing him in a hospital, but I also dragged him kicking and screaming to various parapsychological places. So the in the city, in New York City, the American Society for Psychical Research is like the first real big parapsychological institute in the world. This, that, and the British Society for Psychical Research. And luminaries from this are people like actually Sigmund Freud, which is a little scary. William James was one of the founders. Folks like that who were really interested in this stuff, and they wanted to have a center. And there is or was a big center in New York on 5 West 73rd Street. If anybody is familiar with New York City, is right off Central Park West, uh, and a big 5-story building, and beautiful brownstone and all that. And I dragged him in there, and we hooked him up to machines, and we gave him psychometry tests, and they simply couldn't deal with him. They didn't know what to do. We went to Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn, and I said, the only thing I ask of you is to, if you give him an object to read, and I don't care what the object is, make sure you know about the object, so we can at least at the end go, yep or nope. And so he would give these very detailed readings, and they would go, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. We'd hook him up to EEGs, and we wouldn't get a normal EEG pattern when he was doing this. Well, the machine must be broken. It was they had their own, and these are parapsychologists. They had their own. If anybody's going to be a believer, it should be these folks. But their form of belief of whatever they believed didn't conform to this new belief. So at the time in EEG land, ESP was thought to be an alpha state, that kind of thing. Uh, Deep healing was thought to be a theta state, things like that. And so these are frequencies per second when you're measuring brain patterns. Well, they hooked him up. He did a reading, and they got beta and they got theta at the same time. And they said, that's impossible. So the machine must be broken. So they did it again on him, and they got beta and they got theta. Impossible. Beta and theta. They simply could not be talked out of alpha, because they had truth. And if anything is different, they'd be happy to look at something that would confirm what they already believed. But it turns out parapsychologists are as closed as anybody else. An essay I want to write sometime or other will be entitled "Beware Belief."
Mm,
Belief screws up your perceptions because you end up defending your beliefs rather than looking at something neutrally and just kind of like a kid in a candy store. What am I going to find around the next corner? Well, again, it's a mystery novel, except it's not a novel. It's a mystery journey that I've been on. Startled every time I did. The reason I keep doing experiments is because I'm startled by the results. It never comes out the way I expect it. And if my experiments never come out the way I expect it, this is really a statement of, to me, you don't know what you're talking about.
mm,
You're sure that cancer won't develop if you treat it early enough. You're sure that healing is in the theta state. You're sure that psychic stuff happens in the alpha state. You're sure, and you have a model of the way the world works. These aren't skeptics. These are believers.
yeah.
When I do my experiments, I only deal with skeptics. I don't deal with, if I go up to someone and say, would you like to volunteer for such and such experiment? They go, oh yeah, that's great stuff. I believe that. I go, whoa, scary. Never
Yeah.
mind. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of this, like, confirmation bias that we often find what we're looking for. And so when you talk
Yeah.
about, kid in the candy store, what am I going to find around the next corner, the next
Yeah.
aisle? If it's what am I going to find? I can't wait to find out. That's different than I know this and this and this are going to be there. Then you
Yeah.
end up missing all the other stuff that are there, and you just see this.
Yeah. And just a little bit earlier, you were talking about you didn't way back then, you didn't feel you were a brick.
Yeah.
I have a scale of brick to pathological sensitive. And the bricks were like you, at least earlier, didn't feel anything, didn't, what, like that, to pathological sensitives. And pathological is not a put down, it's a statement of somehow they're in a world in a very different way. Um, and they're seeing things and sensing things and flopping on the floor because they're getting information somehow. I don't know how they make it through the day.
Yeah.
But I've tested bricks to pathological sensitives, and it turns out they all heal the same.
Yeah.
And that's contrary to some beliefs.
Yeah.
So you get a cage of mice, and the pathological sensitive puts their hands around the cage of mice, and they go, "Ooh, I'm feeling something coming out of my hands. I'm feeling a oneness with the mice, and they're flopping around, and this is a special thing." And the bricks are going, put their hands around the cage, and say, "You feel anything? What? You don't feel anything about what? you know, and the healing takes place the same.
Yeah, that is fascinating to me. Part of my what I'm calling, let's say, my energetic journey lesson is in the beginning, couldn't feel anything, people were getting results. Then it turned into I could feel it, and you would think, oh, how wonderful. But then it turned into, but I have to be able to see it, and if I can't see it, like there's something bad about that. And then it turned into I could start to see it, but I didn't see it to the degree that I wanted to. There was always something missing. And as I've let that go and step more into, it worked when I couldn't feel it. It works when I feel it.
Yep,
It'll work when I see it, and it doesn't have to happen now. And it'll happen if it
yep,
happens when it
yep.
happens.
There's an interesting series in replication, and it goes not just in healing or psychic stuff. Uh, and this actually comes out of the Princeton engineering department. Looking, can consciousness affect the random number generators?
Yeah.
So they worked on that for 30 years. Wonderful series of studies, absolutely extraordinary, millions of trials, all this kind of thing. But you get someone, and they only dealt with naive people like off the street, kind of like I did with my mice. And they come in, they say, well, here's your task. We got a random number generator. I'd like you to sit down and try to make the random number generator, alter from heads and tails or ones and zeros, same idea. It's an electronic coin flipper of various types. And so just try it. And they go, how do I do that? And they said, I don't know how to do it. Just do it. And they would go, okay. And they just, okay, and they do it. And they'd score very high, very successful. And then they'd get scared because did I do that? Let's do it again. And the effect size would diminish.
Yeah.
And then the effect size would diminish. And then they start trying because they want the effect size to go up, and it would keep diminishing. And then they'd go, I don't really give a damn anymore. And it would start to go back up this way. And I don't care. Would you stop this stupid thing? I hate it. And it would keep going. And it's in multiple iterations of the same task. You start high, beginner's luck. You bottom out when you don't care anymore, and you creep back to the original beginner's luck.
Yeah, it's reminding me of one aspect that I've been exposed to in my journey is often the best healing happens when you're in that state of non-attachment.
Oh, absolutely. I have a healing manual, which it just happens to be on my desk here. This is the whole thing. So I don't want to take a lot of the time to read the whole thing, but one side,
So for our people only on audio, it says be playful. And the other side, avoid ritual. Yeah.
that's my manual.
Yeah.
Come in playful and tell me how to do it. Tell me, no, I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Well, I mean, I'm going to tell you a healing technique and do the best you can, but let's play. Let's play. Let's find out what happens. And it turns out playfulness is the strongest predictor.
Yeah.
Ritual kills it because you start getting it's analogous to belief. In belief, I'm trying to reinforce belief. In ritual, I'm thinking that something I did produced the effect, and I have to get the ritual right.
Yeah.
If I don't get the ritual right, I mean that's the metric of how well you can do any task, and it's just simply wrong. So you're sitting here, we come in, we're hanging out, and we go, boy, are we happy today? We shake our hands, and then we come in tomorrow and we're not as happy. What should we do? Well, let's shake our hands, and maybe that'll make us happy. And then when it doesn't happen, we make sure we're doing it right, or maybe we have to shake our hands at a different speed, or maybe it should be in and out, or maybe it should be, I'm trying to recapture the original spontaneity that I once had, and think that if it doesn't work, I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
If a sick person doesn't get better, they must be doing something wrong. Or I, as the healer, I'm not a healer. I, as the healer, I must have done something wrong. If I could only get my technique down, if I could only nail it down so it became a rule, as if there's a rule and variations or deviations from the rule are false.
Yeah.
That's when you screw up.
Mm.
You're having fun with this. That's the main ingredient.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's something that stood out to me that I wanted to read here. It was a quote from the book, and then I have a question for you. Science is a faith-based system with gatekeepers, ever ready to persecute its heretics. And so the question I'd love for you to share with us is what you've noticed and how your lectures are typically received by members of the scientific community, both publicly when you're giving it to an audience, and then privately what some of these people might say to you when it's just the two of you when they learn about your experiments.
Well, I'll go back to skeptic societies. They come in and, they're sitting like a pretzel and they're going to show, I'm the village idiot. And they're going to look for any sign that I am the village idiot. And I get up there and say, I'm the village idiot. Because you understand, you who think you're a skeptic, you think you understand the way the world works. I'm still baffled by it. It always comes out different. But at the end of this, I mean, what do you say? Here's experiment, 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 experiment. Here are the conditions. Here's how it was done. What do you do with that? Well, you get nervous, and at the end of that kind of a talk, you run out of the room. But somebody always comes up quietly and goes, "That was great," And I say, don't worry, you're not being heretical, but they are being heretical because they know how the world works. And sometimes they don't know how the world works, and they're interested in something different, but they don't know what to do with it. So, an example, I've spoken to departments of oncology in medical schools, and I do my shtick and I present data, and they spend 2 or 3 hours trying to cut my knees out from under me, which is fine. And at the end, I generally get a standing ovation. Now, does that mean they've converted? Does that mean I screwed with their head? Does that mean, what exactly does it mean? And the answer is I don't know, but from a practical point of view, they're in oncology, which has its limits, and it's a faith-based system. I'm agreeing with myself. And the faith, the belief, what the patterns are, what the trends are, they change over time. But what do you do with it when you find out healing has shown experimentally to do stuff that the conventional stuff doesn't do? What should a physician do at that point? Give up the conventional stuff? It doesn't make any sense. And you're going to be kicked out of the academy if you do too much of this stuff. And the history of inquiry has been people jumping out windows because they can't take the rejection that's going on. And it's not just in hocus pocus world. It's in geology, it's in chemistry, it's in physics, you can go in the history of science. People don't like challenges unless the challenges don't challenge their belief very much. Because if the world doesn't work, I mean, really on fundamental levels. So let's take, here's an example, and I'll call on my work. Placebos, I don't think are psychological. Or if they're psychological, it's only a minor part. I think placebos are actual physical bonding of spatially separate groups. So you do a test of, say, a drug, and you got however many volunteers you have, and they come through and they randomize it into this or versus that, and they give a drug here, and they give a placebo here. And then the simple logic of simple experimental design is, at the end of the experiment, you see if there's a difference between the group that got placebo and the group that got the active substance. Nice and simple. But notice the faith-based assumption of that. It assumes that physically separate groups are independent of each other. What if that's not the case? Physically separate groups being independent of one another would be something called locality. But what if there's such a thing as non-locality? As you talked about earlier, you did a session on Zoom with someone in California, and you're in New York. I don't know if I have the right places, but California and New York, how in heaven's name can you do that? Unless there's such a thing as non-locality. If there's not such a thing as physical independence means real independence, I don't pretend to understand how you two could have been hooked up, but you got hooked up. You went into, I prefer the term resonance.
Mhm.
And resonance is a fluid thing. You can be in and out of resonance. You can be in and out of resonance with a place, a person, an animal. I love my dog on Monday. I hate my dog Tuesday. It's not the dog, it's the connection. Physical healing at a distance is a connection. Volunteering for a medical trial is a connection. The person is willingly saying, I hope I'm in the chemically active group, but let's find out. I mean, let's try. Let's. You're asking to join a group. If you join a group and you treat one group, what if you're treating others? So I have in my experiments mice of various numbers, up to 75 in a single experiment. If we can collectively bond them, they get better faster. If we have a control group and that control group gets bonded, think drug trial, gets bonded, the control group has an effect, a measurable effect. And that measurable effect is the same as the measurable effect in conventional placebo work.
Yeah.
So what that means, or what I've done, is I have placebo effects in people. That's not hard to do. I have placebo effects in mice, and I don't think the mice believe. I have placebo effects in cell cultures that can be modeled exactly like humans. And here comes the kicker. I have placebo, this last one isn't published. I have placebo effects in placebos.
Hmm.
I got the FDA to return unused placebos that they had made. And I gave them to two biologists independent of each other and said, tell me what you got in these pills. What do you mean? What happens? What if you try to treat them as if they're chemically active? Are they chemically active? Just test the pills. And it turns out all the placebos were chemically active. Why? They were all part of the same experiment. That's a faith-based assumption of science.
Yeah. Yeah.
Faith-based assumption of science. Time works in a linear fashion. What if you can violate dimensions of time as we understand it? What if you could not only do a treatment in California, but what if you could do a treatment in California next year,
Yeah.
last year? Think of the implications of that.
Yeah.
Never will it be considered because you got to be crazy.
Yeah, part of what I've learned along my journey is, at least when it comes to this type of work, distance and time don't matter. And
But think of what you just said.
yeah.
And if distance doesn't matter, it's not energy.
Mm.
Energy diminishes with distance. So I have as you graciously call my book, The Energy Cure. I said to the publisher, oh, you shouldn't call this the energy cure. I don't think there's any energy. And they said, thanks for your input. They didn't care because nobody's going to recognize that it's not energy. Nobody's going to care. It's energy. They talk about energy work, energy healing. Everybody uses the same phrase, but think about what you just said. If it doesn't diminish, what goes from here to California without diminishing?
Mm.
And how would you do a test if you could heal over time, past or future? I mean, these are really interesting.
Yeah.
And then what happens at the end is your head explodes.
Something that in response to the question I asked you, when to me, for a person to be able to say, here's something I've just experienced, witnessed, noticed, etc., and it goes counter to everything I know and believe based on my own experience, in that moment, you have a choice of at least one of two things. One is that actually just happened, which means there must be a gap somewhere in what I know that makes this possible when I thought it was impossible. That's interesting. Let me be open to it and let me figure out how this happened to the best
The
of my.
universe is giving you a clue.
Yeah. And then the other one is I witnessed it, I experienced it, I saw it, but that's impossible. So I must have been something wrong with my perception, and
Yep,
you write
yep,
it off.
yep. You're
And
a mess. You're a mess if you think that's what you just experienced. You need to be narcotized. We have to give you a pill so that you don't think stupid thoughts like you just said, because it can't be.
And something you've said several times that I think is so important, and yet oftentimes as people progress on their journey, whether it's academically, in their status or title, their reputation, their career, the phrase "I don't know" is often a bad or scary phrase. And it's something that you step into so frequently, both in your book and the audio program and this podcast. Can you speak to the importance of "I don't know"?
Oh, that goes also to skepticism.
Yeah.
A skeptic doesn't know. A believer believes, knows, doesn't need to question. The book is finished. You shut the door. I don't need any more information. I got this nailed. Um, I don't know. I don't know how you could hit, and I don't even know if that's the right term. You could hit your client in California. I've done experiments from here to California with mice, as opposed to putting your hands around a cage in a mouse room. Same results. How can that be? And the answer is I don't know. I also don't know anybody who knows.
Hmm.
I just don't know anybody who knows. I wish I did. I wish I could meet someone. But anybody who points out, a hypothesis, they're pretty easy to shoot down.
Hmm.
And the in thing to talk about today is quantum this or quantum that. It must be a quantum this. That doesn't make any sense at all. It's comforting because you think you've wrapped yourself around something that's considered to be legitimate, even if it's crazy. But entanglement doesn't make sense. You're dealing with subatomic particles and you're dealing with matrix algebras and you're dealing with this, that, and the other thing. It just doesn't make sense. Resonance makes sense because it's fluid. So how could we attach to a client in California? I think an equally interesting question is how do you detach? And what are the rules of attachment and detachment?
Hmm.
So much we can play with.
Yeah. I feel like part of your magic that I hope people are picking up on, so they can apply it in their own world, is that kid in the candy store mentality of there's so many questions, there's so many ways we could take this. Let's ask, let's be curious, let's experiment, let's try. How do you think it works? I don't know about that. And rather than taking it personally, it's
Oh,
like, oh yeah, I can see why that you don't think it works that way. And then because we're actually just trying to go after what's real and what's true instead of that we're right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And maybe what's real and true changes over time. Maybe we're even asking the wrong question.
Exactly, yeah. Instead of being one thing that's never
Yeah,
changed.
in fact, some one of our counterparts in the future, we look back at 2025 and go, "You really thought that? You were dumb as dirt."
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting when I find out that the stuff I was sure about in 2005, I think I got these nailed. No, they all fall apart. They all fall apart. Isn't it? But isn't that exciting?
Yeah, one of the things is I've studied various forms of what, just for simplicity's sake, calling it energy work. I
Yeah.
have studied Hawaiian healing, Reiki healing, pranic healing, a handful of other ones, and then getting exposed to your system. And from this space, some of them are like either spiritual healing, like faith healing, some of them are just more scientific based, either way. And seeing, all right, in this system, how do they say that it works? And then like, okay, they've got these symbols and these chants and this like this is where the energy is coming from. A different system, different chants, different symbols, and this is where the energy comes from. And then let's say there's more, let's say like with cycling and what you do, and then seeing how that's happening. And then in my mind, I like to think, okay, well, if it's all working, there
Yeah,
must be some overlapping principle that they're all tuning into coming from, but they're labeling it different things.
yep,
And in the beginning, my mind, ever since like a young age, I don't know if this is just a me thing or this is just very common, it was like, what is the right way? Like, what's the right way to do this? And so I would spend all this time in one system and go, okay, I got to draw it in a certain way. I got to chant it in a certain way. It's got to happen. The ritual you talked about. And then I would learn about somebody else who got the same result or better using a different system.
yeah,
But like my teacher in this system is getting that result. So it's like, okay, but they got different symbols and they have different chants and different
yeah,
rituals.
yeah,
How are they
yeah,
both getting the same result? And then eventually it's like, oh, it's like the ritual simultaneously doesn't matter and it matters. And I like the way you put it.
I have Reiki masters who tell me, this, that, and the other, and rule one, rule two, rule three, and you're exactly as you're saying. And then another Reiki master will contradict the first, and that no matter what the system is, that's the case.
Yeah, something that I
Uh,
got to experience personally, and then I got to it was strengthened by reading your book. This idea of ritual that it occurred to me, like I was alluding to, that the fact that different rituals are producing the same result, it can't be the specific ritual itself, but it's what the ritual is doing, where by stepping into the ritual, I'm shifting the mindset, who I'm being, the preparation, the anticipation, and am I getting myself into a state of, let's say, readiness for whatever
yeah,
it is I'm about to do?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I when I teach people how to do the cycling technique, which is the healing method, I tell them do exactly what I tell you. So exactly. So I want you to do this, this, and it's 'cause at least we have a system that's been probably more tested than any other system that's ever been. So I want you to do exactly this so that you can immerse yourself in it, and then you're not repeating it, you're starting to feel it. And once you start to feel it, make it your own. Because the cycling techniques are just techniques, they're gimmicks. There's stuff that have worked in the past, but anything I do, you can do better. So make it better. It's not a revelation, for crying out loud. It's a gimmick that works. But a gimmick that works doesn't mean there's not an improvement on that gimmick.
Yeah.
And I would be pleased if you would come back and show me I'm really full of it. And really show me. Well, I'll give you an example. At 15 years ago or so, I was reasonably convinced that you shouldn't combine conventional treatments in cancer with hocus pocus treatments in cancer. Conventional treatments in cancer, I lived and experienced and thought about, are geared around killing. And so if I'm giving chemotherapy or I'm giving radiation or something, the idea is to kill. And I'm not saying that as a put down, but the method, the path you want to go down is let's kill these cells, or let's kill this tumor, or let's kill. Healing seems to try to heal, and combining healing and killing together doesn't seem like a great combination. Would you, for example, end up treating the conventional treatment? Because dead stuff happens in the conventional treatment. And so we had also had some failures clinically with people who had combined healing and killing. And so if I was teaching a workshop in this, you come to me and how do I learn how to do this? I would say rule number one, not hard and fast, but rule number one. But by the same token, more important than rule number one or rule number two is don't believe me. I'm not giving you revelation. I'm giving you my experience so far. Follow my experience so that you can break off and make it better. And one of my students came back and he said, basically, you're a loser. And I said, go on. He goes, here's a case I just did of a human with, stage whatever cancer. They were taking chemotherapy or radiation. This is what happened. I went, really? And then another case, really? And then another case, really? And then another case, really? I agree, I'm a loser. So the rule is not the rule. The rule was a mistake.
Yeah.
I shut the door too quickly. I can fall into the same trap as anybody else.
Yeah. Something that you were
But
sharing. Please go ahead.
but I'm perfectly happy, and I use this guy, in a workshop as an example of call me a loser, but not philosophically. Call me a loser experimentally. Call me a loser clinically. Call me a loser systematically.
Yeah.
And people come to me and say, "You're a loser," and I go, "Thank you."
It's like, show me the blind spot, show me what I'm missing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm reminded of a Bruce Lee quote that I'm going to paraphrase, but he basically says, if you want to learn the guitar, practice the chords, get down, get the calluses, learn everything that you can. And then once you got it all, forget it and just play.
yeah, that's right. That's
And
right.
so it's like, all right, I'm going to learn the rules, quote unquote.
Yeah,
This is how you do it.
yeah.
But then once you pick it up enough, then it's like you kind of make it your own and there's no rules anymore. And there never
There's no
were.
rules anymore.
Yeah. It's like they're
What
never.
what you've done in my terminology, you've moved from mindful to mindless,
Yeah.
and all mastery is mindless mastery. You can do mindful walking, have a bowl, enjoy yourself, do whatever, but you don't want to bet the ranch on that form of walking. Once you start learning how to walk and you flop, start learning how to flop, start learning how to flop, and then suddenly transformation, you can never again not walk
Yeah. Mm.
because you're not thinking about it anymore. You don't need to try. You don't need the effort. You know the techniques. You know what you need to do, and then you don't need to use them because your body knows now.
Yeah.
Your
Something.
body will know how to play the guitar.
Yeah.
Mine won't because I haven't done step one. But if you've done the preliminary stuff, it's essentially the same plot.
Yeah. Something that I know is a big aspect of your work is focusing on how can we store and scale healing. And I know in the book you figure that out with both water and with cotton. I know different people will use, let's say, certain crystals because water is a liquid crystal and that can be in there as well. Could you speak to the idea of water having memory and then storing and scaling it and storing and scaling healing?
Yeah, water having memory is the storage part. Cotton having memory is the storage part. The question is, how do we scale it? And the idea behind scaling is, can we make healing conventional? In order for it to be conventional, it has to be widely available. It has to be able to be stored. It has to be able to access when you need to access it. You need a boatload of doses. We'll call it doses. So there's an inexhaustible supply of people in pain out there, and it's not just pain, with troubles. If you learn your Reiki and I teach someone the cycling and you pass along the Reiki how many people are you going to get to? The list is the need is staggering. And so let's say you needed 1 million doses. That's not very many. What if you needed 100 million doses? What if you needed 1 billion doses? And I'm not being facetious about the number, but let's just keep it nice and simple. You need 100 million doses. Well, you're not going to do that with hands-on. No, I mean, the geometric progression looks beautiful. I'll teach and they'll teach and they'll teach and they'll teach, but it's not likely to happen. How many people are going to want to really do this and teach this and, et cetera, et cetera? And is it even possible? I don't know, but can we make it more conventional in the same way that can we move from lightning, I wonder what that is, to here's a thought about electricity, to putting it in a box, a battery, to mass producing the box? Is that possible? So the first part is, can you store it? Yes. I mean, that's not interesting anymore. There are many, many, many experiments going back to certainly at least the great grad at McGill University that shows that water will store and hold. It's a wonderful medium. Crystals might be. I haven't done a lot of work on crystals, so I can't weigh in. And interesting stuff that also come from the great Bernard Grad, cotton. Cotton turns out to be a wonderful storage medium. But let's say a piece of cotton works. So you as the healer put your hands around or whatever your method is or intend or want, and the cotton is changed somehow and it contains X dosage of healing. If that cotton can't be replicated, if that cotton can't be scaled, it's curious, it's interesting in its own right, but it's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So for example, have put cotton even under an electron microscope, looking for structural changes, and can't find anything. I don't know what the stuff is, but the cotton will do stuff, and we can measure it. So I'll give you an example of doing stuff. This is done at Brown University. You take a container of cancer cells in a well plate, but a container of cancer cells, think test tube, container of cancer cells, and you start to bring it near charged cotton, cotton that's been treated. As it gets in very close to it, the genome of the cotton will change. Now that's reasonably interesting, but it doesn't address the second part of the question. It addresses storing, and then all sorts of experiments can come from that. It doesn't address scaling, or at the very least, I don't know how to scale cotton. So if I have a piece of cotton and it is charged, it's informed, it's been changed somehow, it's gotten X, it doesn't necessarily mean cotton charges cotton charges cotton charges cotton, and we had some sort of system to get to 1 million doses or 10 million doses or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well,
So cotton I mean, it's curious, and I don't know what ties together cotton and water or crystals or. Water goes back farther in people's minds of testing. And there are also interesting things that happen with water. The bond angle of the hydrogen atoms to oxygen change, a lot of measurable things that it works. You can take cells which have been injured in some way through conventional methods, scratch tests and things like that. You put it near the water, the cells, if they have motility, are going to try to get to the water. I've done tests with lab nutrients that cells are grown in, where you test the nutrient bath that you get off the shelf in cell work, shipped it to San Diego, and they grow cancer cells in it. It's as if we're putting our hands around the cells. So if they swim in the cell medium that's been treated, you get significant changes. If you put your hands around water, you get significant changes. But same problem. How do you scale cell medium? And if you can, who cares? Unless you're doing experiments on cells.
question for you, Bill. Have you noticed that? So I know in your book you talk about how you might charge a piece of cotton, you might mail it across the country, across the
Yeah.
world. They have either the tumor or the pain or the whatever. They apply the cotton, and let's say either it gets better, it goes away, whatever it might be. And I also remember though, if they had used it and then just kind of held on to it and then tried it again later, sometimes it would create the problem because somehow maybe it's like a transfer or something. When
Yeah.
it comes to the water side of it, if you charge water, is there any, let's say, time limit on, because you're going to mass produce it? If this is the water bottle that I've charged, could I ship it somewhere and 15 years later somebody drinks it and they get the
Yeah,
benefit?
we're not sure how long it lasts, but that is the case, and we've gone past treating the water here and keep shipping it to you in California, and we use water clinically, in particular if you've got non-localized conditions. So, for example, leukemia, you don't have a spot. Breast cancer, you got a spot. You put the cotton on the spot. Leukemia, just drink the water. That'll do it.
Yeah.
But that again, the same problem. How can we scale this? And what we've done lately is it costs a lot of money to ship water. It's heavy. Um, we get you to have water, so you have a water bottle here, And like you treated your client in California,
Yeah, treat it
you
all.
treat the water bottle,
Perfect.
and that'll do it.
Yeah.
But it's still a scaling problem. And what's the relationship between volume? I mean, I can't, I'm assuming, intend to cure anything that's touching the Atlantic Ocean. All the fish don't get fixed. So, what is the relationship between taking a pint of the Atlantic Ocean, treating it, and then you dump it back in the ocean? Well, something's wrong with that. I mean, I can't go there. I can't go there. We got to produce another Atlantic Ocean, but we got to reproduce the Atlantic Ocean. Well, it turns out we have recently come up with some tests and some techniques, which we're still testing here and there, by which we take water and we treat it like you would treat a mouse, and you take that and we stuck it in a gizmo. It's my term, which at this point I don't have enough data, so I'm just going to call it a gizmo, alleges to reproduce it, and it'll reproduce the water like you would a fire hose. So it's an actual device where there's an input of water and an output of water, and there's stuff in the middle, and that stuff in the middle seems to charge the water that goes through it. So we have large amounts of stuff that reproduce the healing effect that has not been now touched by a human. And we've tested this experimentally and clinically, and so far it's racking my skeptical brain because it's just this can't be working as good as it works. It is working as good as it works. We just published recently a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized study of humans going into a hospital for COVID. And they were going into a hospital for COVID. They got PCR tests, they got this, they got that, they got measurements of symptoms and all those kinds of things. Double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled, the whole thing. In effect, we have little bottles, some of which have gone through this gizmo, and some of which have not gone through the gizmo. The doctors administering this to the patients don't know what it is. The patients don't know what it is. Nobody there in the hospital knows what it is. And then we compare locality. We compare the people who got the water through the gizmo versus the people who got just plain water. Drops under the tongue. 2 drops under the tongue, 6 times a day for a week. And the simple reality is we blew away the medical model. The people in the hospital who took the drops under the tongue that had gone through the gizmo significantly differ within a day of the people who are just getting medical stuff for COVID. The people who got the water under the tongue also get medical coverage because they didn't know what they were getting. But we're comparing then not a control group where nothing is done, but people taking conventional medicine versus the people taking the hocus pocus water. The interesting part of this is no human touched the water. No human touched the flasks. This was all mechanized and shipped out. So if we compare our hocus pocus to water, we're better than medicine.
I'm imagining in a paper write-up, you could call it HPW. It's like hocus pocus.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's
there-
fun. It's fun to make fun of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, there's a quote that is in your book that I think speaks to what you're sharing right now. It's by Saint Augustine.
Yeah,
Miracles do not happen in contradiction to nature, but only in contradiction to that which is known to us of nature.
that's
And it
right.
reminds me of a quote. I came up with this quote a couple years ago and it just stuck and I love it. Magic is science not yet understood.
Yeah, that's good.
And it's like, 'cause if it works, there's science. If we don't understand it. So right now, if I grab my cell phone and we went back in time, however many, like let's say 1,000 years,
You can burn at the
um,
stake.
yeah, you go to some king or emperor or something and you say, hypothetically, you had two, and you go, here's this one. And I gave the other one to someone across the planet, and they'll say like, "What's a planet?" But then you'll
Yeah,
do
what's a planet? That's
and
right.
then you'll say you can speak to that person, and they wouldn't use these words, but just for the sake of our conversation, where's the wire? Oh,
Yeah,
it's in the air.
it's
I
in
don't
the
see
air.
it. It's invisible. And now we know, no, there's just technology, and this is how it works. This is what you can do. But it's like the technology always existed in possibility, and then we actualized it through whatever, science we've done.
Yep.
But would love you were starting to allude to this. I would love to get your take on this. Since the release of your book 15 years ago to now, what have been some of the primary updates, shifts in your thinking, experiments that you've done that have really excited you? Maybe things that are in the book that you go, in hindsight, if I could write like a 2.0, these would be the big changes.
Well, I don't remember whether it's in the book or not, but for example, the treating of conventional or the combination of conventional and unconventional medicine.
That one's in there. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. And I was once reasonably confident, but wrong, that you shouldn't combine the two. And I don't know what the blockage was that made it wrong, which leads to another unknown. Did my belief, because that was close to belief, did my belief come true, but it was unnecessary? So, in
Mm,
other words, belief became not a comforting thing, but belief became a limiting thing.
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
And just
The,
for the sake
the,
of
the storing and scaling stuff now, I never would have predicted to go down this path. This was new to me. I also have some studies. Uh, if the goal is to have unlimited amounts of healing, the simplest, the most scalable thing I can think of, I'm going to go back to your cell phone, is to have a recording or a technique to capture healing electronically.
broadcast.
Then the scaling, which sounds like madness now, but now it's just put it in the cloud. Anybody who needs a healing, a treatment, download it.
Yeah.
So instead of taking this pill, which I can mass produce, it doesn't come close to what I can mass produce and make available to anyone who has one of your little magical gizmos.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it reminds me of there are people who use sound, let's say, from a healing perspective, and there's certain frequencies that they'll use, and those frequencies will destroy cancer cells, let's say, but leave regular cells untouched. Or there's certain, you familiar with cymatics?
Yes.
Yeah, so if anyone goes on YouTube, it's pretty cool. You could watch it. You type in cymatics, cymatics, and you'll see a plate, and it'll have like sand or salt or sugar or whatever it is, or water, and there's a speaker beneath it. And they'll play certain frequencies or sounds, and you see immediately with the different sound, the sugar, the salt, the sand, the water changes the geometric shape really
Yep.
quickly, and it's like predictable where the same kind of frequency produces the same kind of shape. And
Yep.
when you think of my understanding, depending on our age, we're anywhere from 55 to 80-ish% water. And when you think about, well, that's going on in you too. And so if you're broadcasting out a signal that is in resonance or whatever the terms may be, that would create a healing effect, that could be amazing. You just broadcast that out. Anyone who's exposed to it consciously or not would probably get the benefit.
Yep. 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 No, I think and along those similar lines, that's one of the two parallel, or not exactly parallel, but the two parallel lines of research going on now is water and recordings. So we have a pretty elaborate study published in the Conventional Biology Journal, wherein we got three people in a 12-foot by 12-foot Faraday cage to get rid of any extrinsic noise. If you've never been in a Faraday cage, you want to get in one. It's really extraordinary. I'm I'm not a brick, but I'm not a pathological. I'm someplace in the middle.
Can you
Uh,
explain to our listeners who don't know what a Faraday cage is?
a Faraday cage is a special room which blocks out electromagnetic waves. And so you're not aware, unless you're a pathological, that you're living in an electronic soup right now. You're living in the midst of electronic pollution. It's everywhere. But like the high school experiment of a frog, where you take a frog and you make it a little warmer, and the frog sits in a pan. You make it a little water warmer, the frog sits in a pan. As long as you increase the temperature very slowly, frog doesn't react and will actually boil alive.
Mhm.
If you throw a frog into boiling water, it's going to jump out. We have been exposed to the frog increasing it little by little.
Yeah.
So the amount of electronic soup that you live in, you've been exposed to it for so long and incrementally increased that it's astonishing. You're a frog sitting there going, seems nice in here, you know. I got no problem here, no problem there. If you take all that away, you get a pure signal, but you also experience something very, very different. In a special 12-foot by 12-foot Faraday cage, which screens out all this crap, if you walk into it, even I, as a non-pathological, go, whoa, what is this? What's going on? Well, I dragged the pathological into this. And I told him to meet me at the lab. And I said, shut up and just meet me at the lab. And I open up a big steel door and I say, here, come on in here. And he goes walking over to the Faraday cage. He had no idea what it was. And he stepped in and he goes, whoa, whoa, I can't go in there. There's something wrong. I said, no, there's really not something wrong. It's a good place to be. And he started again. He says, something's very different in there. And I put little breadcrumbs on the floor, and he was hungry, so I eventually got him in. And he's on his hands and knees, and he gets closer and closer, and he goes, and finally he gets in, and he just stands up and he goes, "What is this place?" He had never been in a non-polluted space.
Very quiet for him.
And it sounds very quiet, even though it's not acoustically shielded. It's very quiet. I experienced it as quiet. He experienced that. He actually stood there and he goes, I got to say again, what is this place? And he said, I'm never leaving. He's
Yeah.
still there. Um, and then he started to cry. He said, I never want to leave.
Yeah.
He had put up so many boundaries trying to not feel the boiling water.
Yeah. Yeah. When I
And
say quiet, I was thinking like an internal reduction of the
yeah,
noise.
it's a wonderful thing. But anyway, in this 12-foot by 12-foot cage, we put 33 different kinds of detectors. And the reason for the 33 detectors, electromagnetic detectors and this detector and that detector, the reason for all these detectors is because we don't know what we're doing. So we try to put any detector we can think of in the room, and let's collect everything that's going on in the room. So we screen it out in a Faraday cage. We put 33 detectors of different stripe in the cage, run it through a supercomputer, and turn it into a downloadable WAV file. We put that downloadable WAV file and we put it through an amplifier into speakers inside of an incubator. In the incubator are cancer cells. What happens when you play this? There's no sound. What happens if you play this no sound to cancer cells leading their normal life in an incubator? And it turns out we looked at 167 genes, and 68 of them genomically change every time we do it. And so 68 of them genomically changed. I didn't believe it, so I kept repeating it. We did this at Brown. 7 iterations, and it does the same thing each time. And so the effect is interesting, but it means that a technology of healing is possible. Doesn't mean we have an answer, because it turns out the effect size on these cancer cells isn't as strong as live. So you get a stronger signal or a stronger effect by putting your hands around cancer cells or playing them in an incubator to cancer cells in this recording? The benefit of the recording is I could upload the recording into the cloud.
Yeah.
If you were a patient, I'd still rather go to the human.
Yeah.
But it suggests that a technology is possible, and maybe we can tinker with the recording, which we're working on right now. Maybe we can tinker with the recording and juice it up a little bit. So we found a way, we think maybe perhaps I got a signal analyst, a guy with a PhD in signal analysis. We got a signal analyst working on my team, and we're seeing if we can juice it a little bit. If we can juice it and produce the same effect as a human, let's see if it has the same effect clinically.
Yeah.
We've tried it on mice, and we get the ulceration, we get the whole deal with this recording. It just takes a little longer than if a human does it. And so, can we juice it up, juice it up, juice it up? In which case, we could have something downloadable from a cloud.
That's wonderful. And if it
That
takes
would,
longer, but
that would be fun.
yeah, and if it takes longer, but it doesn't require a person to be there, it can be on, I'd imagine, as long as it needs to be on.
Yeah, but I want to see, can we make it even stronger? But I don't know, is there going to be a differential effect? So there is a differential effect if you compare different techniques, for example.
Mhm.
If you have Reiki, I'll just go, I don't know Reiki, but I know of Reiki. So if we compare Reiki to cycling, it works differently on different things.
Mm,
That's not better or worse, it's different. For some things, Reiki is better than cycling, and for some things, cycling seems to be better. If you were a clinician, you would want to have access to both, I would think.
mhm.
Because if you don't have Reiki in your quiver, you ought to. There's some things it's just better at, and there's some things that cycling is just better at. I don't know how much is due to the system itself versus variation due to the practitioners themselves. So would you have Reiki? This guy does Reiki this way, and the other guy does Reiki that way. This guy does cycling this way and does cycling that way. How do we account for the variation in healing?
Yeah.
It's all a pretty interesting question. But that's the short version answer to, yeah, something's going on and we can capture it. We can't make it as I don't I think water in our slower going through the hose system seems to be as good as a human, but I'm not going to get 10 million doses easily.
Yeah.
The recording isn't as good as a human yet. And I'll do yet, so it's like the Model T. Cars today are better than the old Model T.
Yeah.
Can we make healing the same way? I don't
Something,
know. I don't
something,
know.
something that I'd love to both acknowledge you for and as a, let's say, loving challenge to all of our listeners. What Dr. Bengston is doing, and people like him, is they're saying, here is a situation where a certain beneficial effect is being created. And that's wonderful. And people are getting benefit. Amazing. And then the thought is, how can we get this scaled so more people can get benefit from this? And it's like anything currently that's available in different contexts that's widely available that helps a lot of people. At some point, it wasn't widely available. And it was people like Dr. Bengston who are thinking in this way who are scaling it up. And so, for my challenge to everyone listening is where can you take something that you know is beneficial, is helpful, but maybe to a one person at a time or a small group of people. And for some of you, you're able to scale that, but you haven't maybe thought about it. You haven't given yourself time to be with it, ask the right questions, be around the right people, challenging certain thoughts and presuppositions that you have. And what if more people could be impacted by whatever it is that you do? Yeah. And if may I ask you a few more things before we wrap up?
Sure.
So there was a part in your book that I love, and I've seen this firsthand, and I wanted to get your take on it because some of our listeners might be in this situation. Most people didn't want to get, oh, not most, many people didn't want to get well. This was especially true of those who have been sick or in pain for a long time. They seem to have grown dependent on their elements as part of their identities.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I mean, it I don't know what to say in addition to that, other than it was shocking to me when it first occurred. Uh, the most common response, I mean, this is a bit of a excessive generality, but the most common response to healing clinically is people run. Sometimes they run because they've become their disease and they don't I don't want you to take it away. What do you do if you've been sick for a long, long time and you, normal worlds have dropped away and some lunatic comes along and goes hocus pocus and the thing starts to go away? You're losing a sense of who you are. You're losing an identity. You become the disease. Yeah, not you don't become the disease, but your self assessment is. So what do you do? What's your day job? My day job is seeking help. And as long as you keep seeking help, you're accepted. Poor so and so. They're going to see this person, that person, the other person, all that other kind of thing. And if you've gone to a healer, my experience is exceptions obviously, but if you've gone to a healer, you've been on a totem pole of looking for ways to get rid of whatever you're trying to get rid of. So you've gone to the white coat people, and then you got to the different specialists of the white coat people, and then you've been to the other white coat people, and all the white coat people are crapping out. And then you try something else, but they don't have the same status as it. And if you go down the totem pole, you can't go lower than me. I'm as low as you go. Here's a lunatic who does this crazy technique, who thinks he can do this, that, and the other thing, and has been doing it for decades. You this is low. You don't want to go tell your family and friends about me. Now, again, it's going to be exceptions, but you get the idea. So, white coat to me is what happens now, hypothetically, if the lunatic takes away the condition. What do you do? Because what your condition is looking wherever you are. I mean, and it's not a put down because there's an inexhaustible supply of people who have horrible things. And you got to have some empathy for them. But after a while, they become that thing that they're trying to, that's their day. They forgot the question.
It reminds
I
me
had
of,
that even it's interesting. I had a case. I don't usually do humans. I like rodents. I had a case with I call humans uprights. Uh, I had an upright, as a favor, because I don't do clinical work anymore. I've trained people and they can go do it for me. And frankly, they're better than me anyway, because they know a lot of different techniques and they can bring to bear whatever you're supposed to bring to bear. I'm just this crazy cycling guy. They cycle too, but they could call on Reiki if they needed Reiki, that kind of stuff. So I would consider probably any of my students better than me. I don't think they're better than me experimentally, but they're better than me clinically. So what happens if I'll give you a clinical case that I did as a favor for someone in another lab. Lady came in, had breast cancer, whatever stage, it doesn't make any difference. And she had had several out-of-body experiences. And I don't know if that's a common theme here, but the out-of-body experiences where you're sick, you die on the operating table, something along those lines. And she actually was sent to me by a lab that studies out-of-body experiences. And the psychiatrists who study out-of-body experiences. It's really fascinating stuff. And she came in and she just started talking about, I want to die. No, she didn't say, she never said, I want to die. She said, I want to go home.
Mhm.
And I said, what does that mean? I've died twice on the operating table. I want to go home. It's beautiful. And there was no fear, there was nothing like that. It was just simply, and she would be openly crying. I can't wait to go home. It was in both cases, it was so jarring to come back to this world. I'm having a good life, but this is a better one. That kind of thing. And I said, "Well, do you want to get better?" She said, "Well, I got a kid, I got a job. Yeah, but that was the enthusiasm. Yeah, but I want to go home. I want to go home. Yeah, and treated her a couple times. She started to get better, and then she died.
Mm.
And I just went. I mean, I didn't know what else to say, but when I heard, "Good for you," she really wanted this. What did she really want? She didn't want a healing. She came to a crazy person who claims healing because the crazy people, psychiatrists, in her lab said, this guy can do interesting things. But what she wanted, I want to go home.
Something really beautiful about that story for me. There's a book that I read 2 years ago or so, and it's a great book. It's about NDEs, near-death experiences, for people listening who don't know that. And book's called God Took My Clothes. And I think it's the author studied over 700 near-death experiences and interviewed many of them. And these people would share their stories, many of which you said, some version of those, like that exact phrase, I want to go home, or it's so much, more real over there. But, often I think in the Western model, we have this mindset around death being a bad thing or a failure. And so
Yeah,
it's like the model is we got to keep this person alive, like pretty much like no matter the cost. But in this situation, it's like the person comes to us, and if we're not thinking about it, if we're thinking about it the conventional way, healing is like the victory or the success, and it not working is not a success.
yeah,
But the thing is, if what the person genuinely wants is to not heal,
yeah.
then it's like they got exactly what was potentially in their best interest or what they wanted,
Yeah, it's tough to be the person making a judgment call about what the best is.
for sure.
That can come across as a rationalization for failure. It can come across as maybe there's a larger question.
Yeah. There's to me, it's like reminds me of the importance of treatment as early as possible at the onset of the condition, because the identity hasn't yet latched on to I am or I have this
Yeah,
condition. Like they're,
yeah,
they're still fresh in the being healthy, whatever, for lack of a better word. I am healthy. And then they have this like onset of symptoms, but they still identify as healthy. So you treat them, and let's say it works, they remain healthy. But if they've had the condition for decades and they identify with it so strongly, it could be much scarier for them to let that go.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting. Again, puzzle upon puzzle upon puzzle. What's the best way to think of this? And what's the best way to think of success?
And so as we wrap up, there's this final photo that I took of a section of your book that I think really speaks to our conversation. And I want our listeners to really take this on as this is, in large case of my experience, this is how it is. Take the case of Nancy, who had an operation scheduled to remove a gangrenous foot. 2 days after seeing Ben, which is the gentleman we talked about earlier, the gangrene was gone. Her doctor was deeply shaken. Gangrene doesn't remit. And when Nancy asked if he would like to meet the man who cured her, he declined. And he said, if I accept this, I'd have to throw out my medical training. What I've seen here is impossible. Close quote. Unlike most doctors, he was generous enough to add, I don't want to meet your healer, but off the record, I recommend you see him rather than me.
Yeah,
And I thought I've been around conventional medicine my whole life. And so I've seen people say things like that, either with the work I do or with somebody else. And just the idea, if I accept this, I'd have to let go. Because in their mind, there's not a combination, but it's like I can see that it can be really frightening to say I've spent maybe decades of my life, all this
yeah,
money, lifetime experience studying something, and I feel like I've got a grasp on this is how it works.
yeah,
And then someone like you, someone like I, someone like Ben does something that in their mind is not possible. And they either have to revisit what they know and make some room for something new, or they have to say, I'd rather just turn my gaze and not pay attention to it.
Yeah, please go away. Please go away. My world is better without you.
And so, is there anything I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to share?
No, it's just most important thing I've said is be playful.
Playful.
And certainly don't listen to me. Check the evidence if you want to check the evidence. I got tons of stuff on my website if you want to look at it. It's just one word, bengstonresearch.com.
Beautiful. And then, is there anything that you're working on right now that's exciting you? You mentioned a few things, so maybe we've already answered it, but
We're playing along with the water, trying to see what the water will do. And so we've done the clinical trials. We've done actually three other clinical trials of 100 people each with the water. We're getting ridiculous results. I don't believe it. And so we decided to take it back down the evolutionary totem pole. So I'm working on worms.
hmm,
And so we have C. elegans worms, which are used in longevity studies. And so just for yucks, we set up a thing. This is also in Providence. We set up a thing where we put a few drops on the food of C. elegans worms. The worms are studied ad nauseum. And they're very simple creatures. They only live a month. They have a simple genome and all this. So we just put a couple of drops in the water and see what they would do. Well, it turns out they're living 10% longer than their lifespan. I never thought of looking at lifespan. That's interesting. I'm working at a university also, University of Washington, to see what in heaven's name is happening to the water. And they take all the toys, and in this one toy or another, it looks at stuff in the water looking for any anomalies. And there's a spike, there's a frequency that occurs. We don't know why. It's at 300 nanometers. And for reasons that we can't figure out, we're seeing really signatures. So we're starting to look at what are we doing to these animals, plants, placebos, et cetera, and what's the importance of the frequency? We don't know. And then there's, so poking around going, what else can I discover? Because I couldn't have predicted that for the worms.
how
I couldn't
wonderful.
have predicted that for the mice. I couldn't have predicted that. So I get to play with nature, and nature keeps showing me stuff, and I keep going, what?
One of the things I love is just you inspire me to live in playfulness, curiosity, awe, and just experimentation and wonder.
Yeah, have a blast. If you're not having a blast, you're screwing up.
Yeah, so
There's just so many interesting things out there.
I'll have all of the links to connect with you that you've given me in the links below for our audience. And first of all, for everyone listening, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your attention today. I don't take it lightly that you're here. I really appreciate it. If this has been valuable to you, please share it far and wide. Share it with anyone that you know who says, I'm a skeptic. And let's put that to the test. And let's see
Yeah.
if they're open to this. And with that in mind, if this has resonated, please leave a review. Amazon, Amazon, Spotify rather, Apple, YouTube comment, wherever you're checking in on this. It's going to help the algorithm, help more people discover this. And Bill, is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, play, have fun. Exactly what you just said.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I call this podcast Transformation Starts Today because I find that most people's favorite day to change their life is tomorrow. And that's why they stay stuck. But you can be different. You can decide to take what we've talked about today and how can you use that to question certain things that maybe you haven't been questioning, to actually be a skeptical, to experiment, to try, to be playful, and bring that level of curiosity that could just shift the rest of your world. All my love to you and your families. I look forward to the next time we connect. Take care. Thank you for being with us today. If this conversation served you, it would mean a lot if you left a review and shared this with anyone who may benefit. An extraordinary life without regret is available to you now. Choose it. It's your time.